On Thanksgiving Day 1978, a young mother named Marylise brought her two little girls ages 6 and 3 to her family's house for dinner. She introduced everyone to her new boyfriend, Gordon. He seemed normal, quiet, and polite. After dinner, the four of them went and they left together. And then nobody ever saw Marylise or her daughters again. For years, their family assumed that they had just moved away and that Gordon and Marylise were off building a life somewhere else. But 7 years later, in a forest in New Hampshire, someone found something that would change everything. What's going on, Midnight Mafia? Sorry that there was no video yesterday. As you know, I put one out on Friday. Barely any of you have seen it. That was Hell House LLC, the real story of. So what are you doing? Go watch it and then come back here for this one. Okay. But seriously, guys, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're new to this channel or you keep finding yourself coming back, then please hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, hit that like video. It lets everybody know that you like me. But just to let you guys know quickly, the next 4 to 5 stories that I have lined up for you are generational bangers. Okay, so make sure that bell notification is, I'm just saying, you're gonna wanna know, okay? Alright, so without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Now, I want you to imagine this. Imagine a cold afternoon in November of 1985, almost exactly 40 years ago to today. And that's when a hunter was walking through Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire, and the park was absolutely massive, over 10,000 acres of dense forest and winding trails. And this hunter had been coming here for years. He knew these woods better than most people know their own children, seriously. But on this particular day, as he was making his way through a section of the forest that he had walked through dozens of times before, he smelled something that stopped him dead in his tracks. People that have smelled this before know what it is. It's that unmistakable smell of death. So the hunter kind of followed the scent through the trees until he came out into this small clearing that was right around the way. And there, partially hidden beneath some brush and some leaves, was this large metal barrel. The kind that you would see at a construction site or an industrial facility. You know, it was rusted, corroded, and the smell was literally pouring out of it. But the hunter didn't open it, no, because he didn't need to. He turned around and he drove straight to the nearest police station. And then when officers arrived on the scene and pried open that lid, well, what they found inside made several of them step back and look away. Because wrapped in plastic bags, stuffed inside of this barrel were 2 bodies. One of them was an adult woman. The other one was a small child. And even more sad, both of them now have been dead for years. Now, I know you might not want to imagine this, and if you don't, that's okay, but these bodies were so badly decomposed that immediate identification was impossible because there were no fingerprints, no dental records to match, no clothing that could be traced, just 2 people who had been murdered, sealed in a barrel, and abandoned in the middle of the woods. So I want you to think as an investigator. Right now, how would you track down this case to get it finished, to find out who did it? Let me know the theories and the ways you would go about it methodically in the comments right now. I'm interested to see if we got any detectives in our comments section.
Take a moment to subscribe
and hit that like button.
It really helps the channel. Thank you.
So, investigators combed that area for days. And they brought in cadaver dogs, which, you know, can smell dead people. And they searched every inch of that surrounding forest. They interviewed all the hunters, the hikers, anyone who had been near Bear Brook in the recent years. And what they found was absolutely nothing. We hear this time and time again. No other evidence, no leads, no missing persons reports that matched these victims. So unfortunately, the case went cold. And for the next 15 years, those two bodies sat in a state medical examiner's office, unidentified, two Jane Does who nobody was looking for. But someone knew exactly who they were. Not to mention that that wasn't the last barrel. While that barrel sat hidden in the New Hampshire woods, and while investigators tried and failed to identify those victims, a man showed up in California. It was 1986, and the man's name was Curtis Kimball. He was in his early 40s, he was soft-spoken, he worked as an electrician, and he met a woman at a local bar. She was a single mother with a young daughter, and they started dating. Just like that, within a few months, Curtis had now moved in with her. And to everybody who knew them, Curtis seemed like a very good guy. He went to work every day on time. He helped around the house. He was so kind to the woman's daughter. But in 1988, Curtis and the woman got into an argument. Not a violent one, just one of those fights that couples have. And Curtis then decided to leave. He packed his things and walked out. But the thing is, when Curtis left, he took the woman's 5-year-old daughter with him. So like any good mother would do, the woman called police immediately. She reported that her daughter was missing. She told them everything that they needed to know about Curtis Kimball, which, as it turned out, wasn't much. There was no social security number that she could verify, no family that he had ever mentioned. It was like the man had just appeared one day out of nowhere. So police at this point, they put out an alert and they started searching for him. And a few weeks later, they found Curtis at a campground about 200 miles away, and he had a little girl with him. But when police asked Curtis about the girl, he said something very strange. He said the girl's name was Lisa. He said that she was his daughter. The woman whose daughter had been taken looked at this little girl and said, "Yeah, that's not my daughter." So police were really confused at this point. And if this wasn't the woman's daughter, then who was this new child? That's when Curtis insisted that Lisa was his daughter. He said there had been a huge misunderstanding here. And when police ran Lisa's information, they couldn't find anything. No birth certificate, no hospital records, no documentation that this child existed anywhere in the system. And when they finally asked Curtis for proof that Lisa was his daughter, well, he couldn't provide any. So that's when police arrested Curtis Kimball for child abandonment. But then something extremely bizarre happened. The missing daughter was found. She had been staying with a friend's family the whole time. There had been a miscommunication between the mother and the friend, which meant Curtis hadn't actually kidnapped anyone. So police had no choice but to let him go. And Curtis Kimball, along with the little girl named Lisa, disappeared. And nobody ever found out who Lisa really was. Her real identity would not be known for another 30 years. Confused yet? Don't worry, I'm gonna tie it all together for you and you're gonna love it. Okay, so back in New Hampshire, it was now the year 2000, when everything was supposed to go Y2K and crash, right? For people that are over 25 years old. Well, okay, in the year 2000, 15 years now had passed from that hunter who found the first barrel. And the case, like I said before, was ice cold. The two victims were still unidentified, and the investigation had gone nowhere. But in May of the year 2000, state employees were doing cleanup work in Bear Brook State Park. And they were just, cleaning up brush, picking up trash, doing routine maintenance. And that's when one of the workers were raking through some overgrown vegetation when his rake hit something metal. He pulled back the brush a little bit to see what it was. And there it was. Another barrel. Rusted, sealed, less than 100 yards away from where the first barrel had been found. And what was inside of this barrel would only deepen the mystery. So when police arrived again and pried open the lid again, they found 2 more bodies, this time inside again. Both of them were unfortunately young children, and both of them had been dead for years. So if you're counting by now, that's 4 victims, 1 adult woman, 3 children, 2 barrels, and the same forest. So who could have done this? Why were these people targeted? And how did nobody notice them missing? Well, this time the investigators had something that they did not have in 1985. And that was DNA technology, which had advanced significantly since 1985. They could extract genetic material from badly decomposed remains, and they could compare samples, and they could potentially identify victims and find then connections. So they took the DNA from all 4 bodies and they started running all these tests. And what they discovered turned this investigation on its head. You see, the woman from the first barrel was the biological mother of the child found with her. She was also the biological mother of one of the other children from the second barrel. 3 of the 4 victims were family. But the 4th child, and this is important, the 4th child was a little girl from the second barrel. But she wasn't related to any of them, which meant whoever had done this had murdered an entire family, then murdered another child and dumped her with them? As you could imagine, this case exploded across national media everywhere. It became known as the Bear Brook murders. Investigators started pulling every cold case file that they could find in New England. They brought in forensic scientists and forensic artists. I didn't even know they were called that. They created these facial reconstructions that were ahead of their time, it looked like, and they reached out, of course, to the public. As you could imagine, a case this publicized, well, the tips came in by the thousands, but still, nobody could identify these victims, and nobody had any idea who killed them. Meanwhile, back in California, the man who had called himself Curtis Kimball had moved on, and by the early 2000s, he was using a different name, Larry Vanner. Larry had a girlfriend named, and I hope I don't mess this up, Yoon Sun Jun, and she was a chemist, and they'd only been dating for about a year. And in June 2002, Yoon Sun's co-workers started getting worried because she hadn't shown up for work in days. She wasn't even answering the phone. So they called police and asked for them to do a welfare check on her to make sure she was okay. And when the officers arrived in Yoon Sun's house, they found fresh dirt in the backyard, and it looked like it was disturbed. So they started digging. And what they uncovered was horrifying. Yoon Sun Jun was buried in a shallow grave. She had been beaten to death. Police immediately started looking for Larry Vanner. And when they found him and ran his fingerprints, something very bizarre came up. Larry Vanner's fingerprints matched a man who had been arrested in California back in the late 1980s for child abandonment, a man named Curtis Kimball. So detectives started pulling every record they could find on this guy. And the more that they dug, the more that different names kept appearing. This man had been using multiple fake identities for decades. And in 2003, Larry Vanner was convicted of murdering Yoon Sun Jun, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life. And in 2010, while serving his sentence in a California prison, he died from natural causes. He died without ever telling anybody his real name. But the story did not end there. Because you see, back in New Hampshire, investigators hadn't given up on Bear Brook. And by 2017, forensic technology had evolved again, as we all know, forensic genealogy. Investigators can now take DNA from an unidentified victim and upload it to a public genealogy database. And if any distant relatives had submitted their DNA to sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, well, they might be a match. So that's exactly what they did with the Bear Brook victims. And after more than 30 years, they finally got a hit. The woman from the first barrel was identified as Marilise Honeychurch from Connecticut. And the two children with her were her daughters, Marie Vaughn, age 6, and Sarah McWaters, age 3. Marilise had last been seen alive in 1978. She had been at her family's house, Thanksgiving dinner. She'd brought her two daughters and she had introduced everybody to a new boyfriend, a man named Gordon Jensen. After dinner, Marilise, the two daughters, and Gordon had left together, and nobody had ever saw them again. And for decades, Marilise's family assumed that she had just moved away somewhere with Gordon, just abandoning them, and that she was living somewhere, raising her girls, and hopefully building a life. But the sad truth was Marilise and her daughters had been murdered shortly after that Thanksgiving dinner. Their bodies had been stuffed into a barrel and abandoned in the woods. Investigators now had a suspect name, Gordon Jensen. But when they tried to find any records on Gordon Jensen, they hit a wall. Because Gordon Jensen wasn't real. It was just another fake name. And then investigators made a connection that would finally break this case wide open. They took DNA from the fourth victim, the little girl from the second barrel who wasn't related to Marilise's family, and they compared it to the DNA of the man who had died in the California prison in 2010. You know, the man who identified himself as Larry Vanner, Curtis Kimball, Bob Evans, and Gordon Jensen. And you wouldn't believe this, but it's true because it was a match. The little girl in the second barrel was his biological daughter. Through genealogy databases and military records, investigators finally determined the killer's real name. And his name was Terry Petter Rasmussen. He was born in Colorado in 1943. He was a Navy veteran, married multiple times, had children with several different women across multiple states. And at some point, Terry Rasmussen decided he was going to erase himself. And for more than 3 decades, he'd move across the country using all of these different fake names. And he would target single mothers. He'd pose as a boyfriend, a father figure. And then he'd integrate himself into their lives. And sadly, before they could see it coming, he would then destroy them. And investigators believe Terry Rasmussen killed at least 6 people, possibly more. Every alias he used left wreckage behind him. Missing women, abandoned children, families torn apart. But in the case of Bear Brook, he had done something beyond comprehension. He'd murdered Marilise Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, stuffed their bodies in a barrel, driven them in the middle of the woods, and then just left them there. And then he had taken his own biological daughter, a little girl whose name has never been determined, and he murdered her too. And then, as you know by now, he put her body in a second barrel, and he sealed it. And he carried it into those same woods and left it less than 100 yards away from the first barrel. Nobody knows why he would kill his own child. Nobody knows how many other victims also are out there. Terry Rasmussen took every answer with him to the grave when he died in 2010 in jail. But here's what we do know. For decades, Terry lived as a ghost, a man with no name, moving throughout the country, destroying families, disappearing before anybody could stop him. He was only caught because he left DNA behind before he even knew DNA was really a thing. And today, the forest at Bear Brook is quiet. Hikers still walk those trails. Most of them have no idea what happened there. But investigators still have questions. There are still missing persons cases connected to Terry Rasmussen that have never been solved. There are still women who vanished after meeting a man using one of these many aliases. And somewhere out there might be more barrels in some forest that nobody has found yet. Because Terry Rasmussen had dozens of identities. He fathered children and then abandoned them. He moved from state to state, family to family, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. So for 30 years he was invisible. The man who called himself Gordon, Curtis, Bob, Larry. His real name, Terry Rasmussen. And the little girl that he killed and buried in that barrel in the woods, well, she's never been identified. She has no name, no family who has ever claimed her, no headstone with her real identity. But investigators do know one thing for 100% certainty. She was his daughter, and he killed her. Now I know some of these stories like this are tough to get through, but it's a necessary evil that we have to do as a channel. We have to expose this evil when we see it. And some of the next stories are very mysterious and paranormal and just incredible in different ways, but also sad in different ways. And that's the kind of balance of this channel. Mysterious, twisted, paranormal. But we got to realize these are real people. And this really happens to a lot of people out there. So stay safe, stay with your loved ones, and I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving and have an even better Christmas or whatever you decide to partake in. But that's all I got for you guys today. I love y'all, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.